All right, welcome back to Hoop Hierarchy. This is KC coming back to you with the final video in the ranking all MVPs by how they would do in the modern NBA tier list series. So, I've been getting a lot of good support on this tier list series. I appreciate any support that you guys are willing to give, and if this is content that you like, I'm really happy to hear that. There's more content coming. Certainly, if you guys have any ideas when it comes to video series, just go ahead and put them in the comments section. I would definitely consider them. I always appreciate new ideas when it comes to these video series. But that being said, I'm going to get right into this one. This one is 2002 to 2011, kind of the last period that could be called pre-modern NBA. I had discussed a little bit before in the past videos, but this is going to be the last one because anyone that won an MVP after Derrick Rose is still playing and still playing at a high level. So it's kind of pointless to see how a player who's still playing would translate, because obviously they're going to still translate if they're still playing well in the NBA. So yeah, that's why this is going to be the last video in this series. But like I had kind of done in the previous videos, I wanted to set up the ground rules for this series. Firstly, this is based on the player's play style, how they would adapt to modern changes of rules, differences in offenses and defenses, and the way the game's played today. It's not if you just took the player and dropped them in the modern day, but if they grew up, say, 20, 25 years ago, and so developed with the same technology and training regimens, so on and so forth, that they did today, with having the same mindset as players when they grew up, and how to develop their game. Obviously, the players that are in this list are going to be a little different than the players that were in the list from the 60s. You have to kind of be more creative with those guys from the 60s, because obviously these guys are much more similar in the way that they were brought up and trained, to the guys now as those guys back then were. So these guys are definitely going to play a little bit more closely to what they played when they played, as opposed to the ones all the way back then. Also wanted to point out that these are not arguments to how good a player actually was, but how well their play style fits in the league. So there will be players ranked higher on this list than players that were better than them. So yeah, for example, if you see a guy that you think is like one of the best players of all time, ranked below a guy who was not quite in that conversation, doesn't mean that I think someone is better than another player. It just means I think their game better fits to the modern day game. So after those ground rules have now been set, I want to get right into it with the MVP of the 2002 season, Tim Duncan. So, Tim Duncan, the most methodical, wear you down slowly guy that there was. I am sure guys that guarded him were completely baffled as to how hard they were trying on defense, and then subsequently how easy Duncan to continue to make everything look on the offensive end. He was a wonderful option as a low post scorer and defender. His passing was probably what would be considered above average. Not elite, but also not something to discount. He was a good passer. His main feature that I feel like would translate well is his just pure ability to lead and win. Like his low post game is less well adapted to today's game, sure. But I don't find it a stretch to believe that he would step right into any roster today and be the main leader of any team. I will say I'm going to be ranking Duncan B tier, though he is borderline A, simply because I do believe a lot of his low post stuff is a bit phased out. I think it would still work for sure. I don't think teams are going to want to build their offense around that type of low post game today. Regardless, I do think he would have a bit more range if he grew up and trained for today's game. And the comparison that comes to mind for me, this is just kind of off the top of the head. I think he would look kind of like a Jaren Jackson on steroids, but a much more fundamentally sound version. I think he would play a lot like that. He would be a great dominant player today. Due to his slightly slower nature, though, he's, like I said, he's going to go at the very top of B tier for me. Next up is Kevin Garnett. So I feel as though a lot of what I'm going to say here is pretty similar to what I said for Duncan, though there's something that tells me that KG actually would translate a little bit better to the modern league than Duncan would. Firstly, I think he was a bit more mobile on offense and a bit more versatile. Duncan, in my opinion, was clear of Garnett when it came to inside the post game. But Garnett was a better shooter and a better ball handler as well, in my opinion. He had more ability to get downhill and drive to the basket. Duncan was still pretty good at that, but I do give the edge to Kevin Garnett. While I think Duncan was also a better defender, Garnett was a truly elite defender as well, and it wasn't that far off of what Duncan was. I think if they were both in the modern NBA, I think Duncan would still be the greater player, because I do think Duncan was a better player overall when they both did play. But I think KG's numbers would probably more resemble what his numbers looked like when he played back then. I think he was a really great piece to have, and I feel like modern teams wouldn't have to fit their offense around him as much. I think he would be more able to be plugged in and played personally than Duncan was. I think teams would have to kind of build their offense a little more around Duncan and his style. I think KG would be a bit like a more agile Anthony Davis, personally, style-wise. I would put Garnett into a similar place that I did Duncan. However, due to the factors I mentioned, he is going to go slightly into the A tier instead of the very top of the B tier. So yeah, A tier for Duncan. So next up is Steve Nash. So Steve Nash seems to be built a lot towards what the modern NBA is. Do I think that he would be the MVP in today's league? I think that's questionable, but I think it's questionable as to why he won it in his time as well. I think Kobe almost certainly should have got at least one of the MVPs that Nash got. That's neither here nor there, however. Nash seems like he came from the 2020s to play in the 2000s. That's how well I think his game would translate to today. Elite court vision, extremely efficient shooter from range, crafty getting to the rim. I think his defense was okay. Not a great defender, but I think what he provides in the offensive end more than makes up for that. I think his closest modern comparison is probably like Trae Young. I don't think he would score quite as much, but I do think Nash would get well into the 20s for points per game pretty consistently in a modern offensive style that gave him the freedom to shoot early and often. I think he was in general a better passer and playmaker than Trae was. I think when it comes to the defensive side, like I said, Nash was not incredible by any means, but he was decent enough, while Trae is quite bad. So yeah, a bit of resemblance to Trae overall in my opinion. A lot of people would possibly say Steph, but Steph has always been kind of a shoot-first guard, while Nash was built primarily as a pass-first guy that could score a little bit. I'm going to say S tier for Steve Nash. I think his numbers would improve across the board. I think he'd fit perfectly as a modern floor general. So next up is Dirk. Dirk, again, another guy that I see fitting in perfectly in the modern day. His back-to-the-basket game, it's pretty modernized. Guys like Jokic still use a weird-looking but effective post-fade type thing. And Dirk basically patented the post-fade. One of the best mid-range shooters of all time, very good three-point shooter too. It is not out of the question for Dirk to be the best scorer at the power forward position in the current NBA. Probably likely, in my opinion. The three-point focus of the current league is crafted around what he did well, which is shooting. One other thing to consider is a lot of people would say he would be much worse on defense. I do think he would slightly be slightly worse on defense, but I don't think it would be drastic. He already wasn't the best defender, which is why I have Duncan over him on my all-time list. However, he was actually quite quick in his prime years. A lot of people picture the slow, lumbering guy he was in his later years with the Mavs. But yeah, he could actually move when he was younger on the defensive end. I see him as the absolute pinnacle of what a Porzingis Markkanen-type big man could be when it comes to stretching the floor and just being completely hard to stop on the offensive end from all levels. I mean, could you imagine Dirk on the modern Mavs? I mean, they would just be one of the best offenses of all time with him, Kyrie, and Luka together. I guess it would really all rely on trying to get those guys to defend if they wanted to win it all, but anyways, yeah, Dirk's perimeter game fits more today than it did then. So S tier for me for Dirk as well. Next up is Kobe. So I'm going to say the same thing I did about Kobe as I did about Michael Jordan in the last video. Kobe is who he is. Most people already know how he played, and he was just so great that he would be great whenever he played. I'm just going to come right out and say I nearly did put Kobe S tier because I think he was so hardwired to succeed that his three-pointer in today's game would be one of the best, even from an efficiency standpoint, which he did kind of struggle back in his day with three-point efficiency. But I think he would have worked so hard and focused so much on it if that was the primary way to score, that I think he would have really worked so hard at it if that was the way that, if that's what he felt that he needed to do, he would have become very, very good as a three-point shooter. However, he is going to go A tier instead, though right at the top of the A tier, because it's hard to say that Kobe would be even better than what he was, because he was already just so good back then. Kobe scored any way he wanted in a league with tougher defenses and less scoring than today's league. There really isn't anyone that could stop him today, just like there wasn't anyone that could stop him back then. His defense, as everyone knows, was absolutely his lead as well. One of the best guard defenders there was. Kobe would be like a better version of Devin Booker on offense and one of the best guard defenders, perimeter defenders, kind of like what Jimmy Butler is on the defensive end. I mean, he's just Kobe, though. We're getting to the point where these dudes did not play that long ago. A tier for me. Next up is LeBron. So this one's going to be pretty short, as obviously the dude is still playing at a high level today somehow. Maybe a cyborg, not 100% sure. But yeah, clearly LeBron can play today. He still does. I mean, this is why after LeBron and Derrick Rose up here next, like I said, I'm not going to cover the guys after them because they're pretty much all still playing and playing at a high level. So yeah. As good as modern LeBron still is, personally, I think it'd be really fun to watch like Miami LeBron again. You know, I was a hater back in the day a little bit, just because he kept beating my favorite team over and over and over again. But the dude was just, he was the best player I've ever watched personally play live. Year after year, his athleticism was completely unmatched by anybody. His driving ability, offensive strength, creativity, it just torched everyone's favorite team, especially in the East. Everyone just got beat over and over and over again by him in the East. He would 100% do the same thing today. When it comes to his modern comparison, I would compare him to LeBron James. Personally, I think they play a lot similar. They have a lot of similarities to their game. So, yeah, to me, LeBron James compares really well to LeBron in the modern game, if that makes sense. Yeah, that was a bad joke. But LeBron's going to go A tier. He is who he is. And finally, Derrick Rose. So, D-Rose, now, I can actually say something here as opposed to with LeBron, as D-Rose has effectively hit the end of his career. Very unfortunate career for one of the most fun players to ever watch in his prime for me. He was really fun. I mean, really a fun player to watch. Rose was one of the fastest and most electrifying guards that I've personally seen. He was a pretty good mid-range shooter, not great out to the three-point line. Defensively acceptable, but his real contribution was always the pure gravity his drives attracted on offense to open up shots for not just himself, but for his teammates. He was explosive like prime Westbrook, but he was also very controlled with it. Not quite to the degree of someone like Kyrie is, but at the same time, he blended finesse and explosion on drives like really no one else did. He was a really, really great player, but at the same time, I think his relative lack of jumper doesn't fit as well now as it did just 10 years ago. Would he be a top 5 point guard? I think absolutely. If he never got hurt, I think in his prime, I think he would still absolutely be a top 5 point guard in the NBA. I just think his fit was a bit better back then. So Derrick Rose is going to be B tier for me. And with that is the conclusion of this series. Like I said at the beginning, I appreciate all the support I've been getting on this series. It means a lot to me. And like I said, I've got other video ideas that I really want to try to get fit in here coming soon, probably in the next week or so. I'm thinking up next, since I just did the MVPs, I think I'm going to cover a little bit on kind of rookie of the years, or number one picks, one of the two, and kind of just not how well they translate, but just do kind of how good they were, I felt like. But yeah, kind of just take those players and kind of analyze how good they were in their time and how well they lived up to the hype from being maybe that number one overall pick. I think that's the one I'm going to do. I think I'm going to do number one overall picks and kind of discuss how well they lived up to the hype of being a number 1 overall pick. Yeah, so that's the video idea I have next for the upcoming series. But if you like this series, go ahead and subscribe. I've got plenty more video ideas coming up next, like the idea I mentioned, and some other ones down the line. And also, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you have any ideas, go ahead and put that in the comment section. I appreciate any support that I'm getting on this channel. It means a lot to me. With that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I will be signing off.